take some questions. We have some questions. I've got to turn on my mic. I'm sorry. And Tracy will be handing out the mic. Go ahead.
Well, I heard what Frank said about his prediction for what's going to happen at the Univision forum, and I wondered if the other two panelists or three could comment on what y'all think the Republicans are going to be saying and doing Sunday night.
Well, I'm planning on being there, so I'll see. But you know, it's hard to know. But I do feel that, and I mentioned it in my remarks, that you know, McCain and Huckabee have made taken a different approach to this issue than the others. It'll be interesting to see when they're in a primarily Hispanic environment if that shifts their wording, if there's any more caveats put in place here. But I suspect they'll say you know, much of the same thing. But I do hope that they would take lessons from McCain and Huckabee on a more values-oriented approach to this issue and a solution-oriented approach.
I think you're going to, is this on? Can you hear? Okay. I think you're going to hear this, the two strategies. And I agree with Frank to a point, but I think you're going to hear the two Republican strategies fighting with each other on Sunday night, which is those that are still holding out a little bit of hope for this more enlightened approach that the Bush family brought to Washington, and then the new strategy, which is ascendant in the Republican Party, which I call the Sensenbrenner, Tancredo, Romney strategy. And I think you're going to see a spirited discussion about it. And I hope, you know, what I think is most tragic is that Tom Tancredo, who has been a racist, and I think to call him anything other than that is simply inaccurate, is not showing up at this debate to defend the attacks that he's made on this community that have been gratuitous, over the top, extraordinary, frankly. And let me just show you his new ad, if I can, that he just released last night, to give you a sense of the guy who now feels like he's being out-Tancredoed by his own fellow Republicans, what his views are about immigration.
Hi, I'm Tom Tancredo, and I approve this message because someone needs to say it.
Mothers killed, children executed. The tactics of vicious Central American gangs now on U.S. soil. Pushing drugs, raping kids, destroying lives. Thanks to gutless politicians who refuse to defend our borders. One man dares say what must be done. Secure the borders, deport those who don't belong, make sure they never come back.
Do you think we could ask him who he means by deport those who don't belong? There's somebody named Rosenberg. I don't like those kind of words when I hear them, right? Because it is euphemistic in a way that is, I think that is a new escalation in my own view. You have a guy who is I call him 1% Tom Tancredo, right? The guy, despite the fact this is supposed to be this defining issue in the white electorate, he's still at 1%. And he's now, I think, desperate to get into the game and is ratcheting up his rhetoric. But it's extraordinary language at the end of that ad.
Do you think there are going to be more ads like this? You said there were a lot of ads last cycle linking immigration to terrorism. Do you think that's going to happen just in the primary or the general election?
Look, I think we've written a lot about this at NDN, and I'll just do this as quick as I can, is that I think the state of play of this issue is that it is a secondary or tertiary issue for the United States, that most Americans care more about, as Bob Menendez said, health care, the war, the economy, things that are everyday struggles that are in the news. But they also are offended and angry that Washington's been unable to fix something that seems so out of whack, right? And the reason this rose from an issue that was not even on the agenda in 2004 to now being, let's say, an upper second tier issue is because the Republicans put it on the map. I mean, they've invested tens of millions of dollars, enormous amount of their brand, in putting this conversation into the American public. And yet it's still, in virtually every poll, is at 11%, 12% an issue of concern, 13%. And even in the Republican primary audience, right, in New Hampshire, only a fifth of Republican primary voters in the New Hampshire primary, according to the Washington Post today, cited as the most important issue for the country. And in Iowa and in New Hampshire on the Democratic side, it's at 1% and 3%, right? And so I think there's a lot of evidence that this is an issue that most Americans don't feel is sort of a burning front burner issue for them, that they would like to see responsible leadership in Washington solve this problem in a way that is consistent with our values and meets the needs of the modern economy. And I think that the investment the Republicans have made in this have gotten them nothing. I mean, I think they've had 2 consecutive elections that they've spent this extraordinary amount of money, and the reason that it hasn't worked is because it's not a primary voting issue for the American people. And because the rest of their agenda has collapsed, because they have nothing to say to the struggling middle class. They don't actually have a vision for how to reform health care. They've obviously had the most failed foreign policy in the history of the United States, that what they've had to go to are these second-tier issues in order to have a conversation with the American people. And every time they try to lead with this, it doesn't give them the results that they've made on the investment side. And I think the emergence of this issue is more of a sign of the utter ideological and political collapse of the Republicans than it is the saliency of the issue itself, right? They have nothing else to say. And so I will say the final point on this is that there are those who've described this issue as a third rail, right? I disagree. And the reason why is that this issue passed a Republican Senate in 2006. It had significant support in the Senate in 2007. It had a backing of the Catholic Church, mainline Protestant churches. It had the support of immigrant groups, labor unions, the Chamber of Commerce, Harry Reid, Nancy Pelosi, George Bush, John McCain. That sounds like a coalition behind a common sense, pragmatic, serious solution to tackle a national problem. In no way does that resemble something that looks like a third rail in American politics. I think that we will, whether Frank is right or not, or Janet's right or not, that they have learned their lesson that this doesn't work as an issue. I think where we're going to see it is in Republican primaries and in low turnout special elections, where Republicans are desperately trying to excite a very depressed base right now. They're raising no money. They have 33% support in the national polls. The biggest issue in American politics, the biggest change in American politics today, is the collapse of the modern Republican Party. Right? They're at 33% in all head-to-heads right now. They've lost a huge amount of their support, and where they're operating as a party is about re-engaging their base. They're not operating in the swing voters. So where this issue will be more salient is in low turnout specials and in Republican primary audience. It has not worked as it's gone to a bigger audience in 2006 and 2007.
And could I just add quickly, we're going to see lots of ads because the Republican House Republicans are going to run on it across the board, and not because it necessarily has been proven to work. There's very scant evidence of it, but because there's nothing else to run on. They're setting it up. They're trying to position Democrats as for benefits for illegals and soft on enforcement. And, you know, look, we'll see. It's going to be tested in a bigger way than it's ever been tested. They tried it in '06 and it didn't work. They're going to try it again in a much bigger way, and we'll have a test. You know, they've tried it in Virginia, tried it in New York. What's remarkable to me is that such a big political gamble by a major political party is being done on the basis of so little evidence and such a big risk. That's what's remarkable to me. I mean, I remember hearing Grover Norquist talk about, with tears in his eyes, how the Republicans turned on the Catholics in 1880s, and it took 100 years before Ronald Reagan was the first Republican presidential candidate to win a majority of the Catholics. He compares what Republicans are doing to Hispanics now in that same light, that this is a 100-year political mistake. This is from a Republican operative. So that's what's remarkable, is that there's such a big risk and there's going to be such a big investment when I'm still trying to figure out which general elections have been decided on this issue. And if there are a few, I've seen a few primaries, I've heard of a few races, right? But in the last election in 2006, it was tested in many, many races. Now, there were other issues, but it's going to be tested even more so now, and you'll just have to see it. The conventional wisdom that this is a great issue for Republicans because it's going to bring swing voters and conservative Democrats over to the I get the theory, but where's the evidence? And that's the question that I hope that reporters will really dig in on.
Yes, sir.
Thanks very much for this. Simon, you've done extraordinary work, and we really appreciate all that Indiana has done in this space in particular. I'd like each of the panelists to drill down a little bit. We've talked an awful lot about what a train wreck this issue is going to be for the Republicans, but we're NDN, so sort of who cares about them? Let's talk a little bit. Frank, you indicated that you're of the mind that Speaker Pelosi, quote unquote, gets it. We've seen some extraordinarily compelling data here to demonstrate that this really should be idiot-proof for Democrats. So when folks go and sit with Rahm and he sets the threshold at 50 votes for a bill to move, there are one of two possible explanations. Either he doesn't believe your data, or he disagrees. So let's, if each of you could,
Frank, you get to ask.
drill down a little bit on where the real problems in the Democratic caucus are and how we can take this data that seems so obvious and conclusive and really move House Democrats in particular to a place where we can see something happen.
You know, let me be generous, which is that I get that many House Democrats are spooked by this issue because they haven't debated. You know, in the Senate, they've had 2 years of debates with, you know, a death march of difficult amendments and have had to, like, put their careers on the line with this being part of the debate. That's not really the case with House Democrats. So there's a tremendous fear of the unknown among House Democrats, and Rahm's job is to get those guys in swing districts that Bush won reelected. And they see this issue as potentially the one issue that could thwart that. So I get the political problem they're dealing with. And it'll have to be, we'll have a big test. But if the Democrats think that throwing the fastest growing group of voters under the bus at a time when there's a presidential candidate saying they're for some sort of enforcement plus comprehensive immigration reform, or passing a bill that's enforcement only and laying it in the Senate lap, it'll be disastrous for the party, and you need a strong top of the ticket to win those, to retain the majority. So I'm confident that smarter folks will end up saying, let's do the right thing, and that it's new. If not, I think the Democrats will be accused of seeing Republicans committing political suicide and failing to assist them.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of concern right now in the House of providing political cover to a lot of the freshman Democrats who are going to be in tight races. And so as a result of that, you're seeing people pouring over the polls and looking at every uptick or downtick. And what I would caution the Democrats and some in the leadership is that, you know, if depending on how you look at the polls, as we talked about today, you know, you might be deceived into thinking that Hispanics don't really care about this issue. It's not the top issue that they care about. But you've heard from every speaker today, including Senator Menendez, it is a defining issue. It is a threshold issue, and it affects them in a lot of different ways. And if folks are looking at the hard and technical numbers of these polls, they may not see that, and I think they could be deceived into pursuing these kinds of failed strategies, and that would be a concern. I would just, you know, I'd also say as they're pouring over these polls, sometimes it's hard to, you know, kind of take a step back and look out there and see this as the opportunity that it is for Democrats to define themselves as leaders on this issue, creating a workable and reasonable solution to a problem that this country wants solved. So there is an opportunity here for Democrats, and it's not about necessarily being so cautious and having to just so focus on enforcement when you can provide a vision for the whole country of how we can solve this. There's an opportunity there for the Democrats if they will take it.
I'll be very brief because I talked a lot earlier, and I think what I agree with everything that was just said, is that I think at the end of the day, the Democratic nominee will be for comprehensive immigration reform or enforcement plus, whatever we're going to call it next year, or for fixing the broken immigration system with three-part strategy, right? And that there will be a press conference at some point in March or April with Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid and the Democratic nominee saying that we will solve this immigration problem by doing the, you know, by essentially pursuing the comprehensive path. I think that is preordained. That's going to happen, right, at the end of the day, because both the Senate Democrats have too much invested in this, and I do believe that Nancy Pelosi believes deeply that this is the right thing to do. And so at that point, that is going to be the position of the Democratic Party. Regardless of where you are around the country, regardless of whether you're in a state rep race or a congressional race, the Republicans will be able to run ads against you saying that the Democrats believe in whatever the words are they're going to use. And therefore, it's been our counsel, and it has been our counsel for several years, that it would be better to respond to that by saying, I have a plan to solve the problem, they don't. And that America is looking for constructive attempts to solve the vexing national problems that we face today. They're looking for an economic strategy that raises wages and incomes. They're looking for a better foreign policy. They're looking for a better and constructive strategy of how to solve the immigration issue. And I think positioning us as, Democrats positioning themselves as the people who are going to solve the vexing national problems, that are going to reach across the aisle, work with this unprecedented bipartisan and deep coalition, is, I think, the winning strategy. It also, by the way, as Frank said, and National Immigration Forum has this poll analysis on their website, it also polls comprehensive immigration reform, including leaving the 11 to 12 million here in the country, gets 55 to 70% support in virtually every poll taken in the United States in the last 2 years, including right before the final Senate vote. The New York Times had a poll showing 67% support for comprehensive. So my advice to my fellow progressives and those on the center left is that immigration is a defining issue in many ways for our family in the early 21st century. It's a test of our leadership and whether we have what it takes to govern the country and meet the great challenges of the day. I think this issue is the right political thing to do, it's the right legislative thing to do, it's the right moral thing to do. And I think it is an incredible test of whether we have what it takes to lead America in the early part of the 21st century, and I'm confident we're going to pass it.
Let me give you 2 points just to follow up on what Simon said. If you looked at polling on this issue before the Republicans made this an issue that they wanted to run on, Hispanics were probably more conservative than other groups on these issues. Clearly, Hispanics are in the first tier of competition. If white Americans or African Americans are in competition for low-rung jobs with Hispanics, you can only imagine what Hispanic Americans are. In other words, with new immigrants coming in. And so and secondly, they know the immigration system's broken. I mean, they went through it, and so they know it's broken. And so the reason, and I think Janet's absolutely right about this, is that when you look at this as an entree issue, it's changed. What used to be very conservative reactions by the Hispanic community now has a very different debate. And secondly, an historic construct. You know, we have an opportunity here. When Lyndon Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act, I mean, he said to his friends, I am giving away the South for a generation or two. There is no question that he did it, but he did the right thing. He did the right move and the right thing, even though the Democratic Party paid a huge political price, but it was good for America. This is one of those issues where it's all plus plus. In other words, there may be a little bit of noise on the front end, but in the end, not only are we doing the morally correct thing, but in the end, it will benefit the party politically in the long term, and without question, it is the good thing for America to do. Yes, sir. If we could get the mic to you. Maybe 2 more. We'll take 2 more questions, and then we'll close it up.
You mentioned the kind of economic side of the question and you know, the African American population, and I'm wondering you know, how this issue does affect other Democratic bases, you know, like the African American population, because it's both a civil rights issue but an economic issue.
Craig, do you want to touch on some of the polling you've done?
Sure. There's no question that African Americans and union households are more skeptical of immigration than, say, well-educated Democratic voters who, you know, have higher incomes. So there's no question that that's the case. And it's because of that that I suspect you're going to start to see, with bipartisanship being no longer viable, at least in the short run, that I suspect you're going to see a more progressive, pro-worker frame on immigration reform, that Democrats will naturally start to put together a package that will be designed to be less business-friendly and more African-American and union-friendly. If that occurs, and I predict it will, then I think that you're going to find, while there still will be the same concerns of, you know, what does this mean, right? But as the debate, this is why I think Democrats need to lean into the debate rather than to avoid it, because otherwise they'll be defined by their opponents and they won't define themselves. So they have to define themselves, it seems to me, and they could define it in a way where, and this is what from AFL-CIO to SEIU and the major African-American-led civil rights groups get, that when you talk about the people, the 12 million here, that not bringing them into the system so that they're here legally actually affects the wages and working conditions of all workers.
Correct.
And so from a, if you will, even a populist point of view, that would be more appealing to African Americans and union members if you focus primarily on that, as well as dealing with getting tough on employers, dealing with labor law enforcement, dealing with border issues. I think that's a frame as opposed to the George Bush defined version of comprehensive reform, which is how most African Americans and others heard about it. Then I think that over time, Democrats will be in a position to have a more consolidated, at least progressive constituency in favor of the core elements of reform. But that all has to happen and play out. We'll see. But that's how I see it happening because of that vulnerability that hasn't been properly addressed by us or by Democrats yet.
My sense is that increasingly the various communities of colors can kind of see what's happening here. Just as this issue, as Joe pointed out, has been phenomenal in how it's unified the Hispanic community. You know, we're not a monolithic group, a lot of sub-ethnic populations, and in the past we recognize that. There have been some common cultural connections, but nothing has done more to unify the Hispanic community in the last decade or two than this issue. And I think people see it, and it's not just because it's immigration, but they see it as a humanitarian issue, as a civil rights issue. And that's true, I think, across communities of color. And while there's anxiety, economic anxiety about what this means, people get this across the Asia Pacific American community, across the black community, and they also get it when people try to create wedges amongst us. And I think we recognize that there's more that unites us than divides us. And I don't think people are going to get tripped up on this issue when it comes to Election Day. I think they're going to see this for what it is. And if it's the division politics, if it's the demonizing politics and the demagoguery, I think communities of color are going to get it.
2 quick points is that, you know, it is amazing that today in this country that 5% of our workforce is undocumented, meaning that they're outside legal protection of American law, they are easily exploitable. In a time where globalization is making it much harder for average families to get ahead, we have the Republicans, by blocking comprehensive immigration reform, have essentially contributed to the downward pressure on wages and benefits at the lower end of the workforce, which seems to be completely inconsistent, frankly, with their overall ideology, right? So I do think that there is, I don't think people really understand the enormity, how many actual workers are here and how big a percentage of the American workforce we're really talking about. And just for a data point, there are more undocumenteds in the country today than there are people who are unemployed. So for example, if we just deported all the undocumenteds, because you know, 5% of the workforce is undocumented, we have 4.6% unemployment rate, there's not even enough unemployed people to fill all those jobs. So this idea that there's plenty of jobs, you know, there's plenty of, if we got rid of all these folks, there'd be plenty of opportunity. We can't even fill these jobs. The second point, and I just want to, it's something that Janet said. You know, there was a reference recently by somebody on the left of center side who talked about this being the new welfare reform and sort of welfare redux, right? Not only do I find that personally offensive, actually, as a way of looking at this issue, but it's also an anachronism, right? Welfare, the way that Ronald Reagan and the Republicans created this mythology around welfare was a core part of the sort of latter stages of the Southern strategy of the Republican Party, right? Which they used in their era of ascendancy to beat back the Democrats. Essentially, a core part of what happened in the transfer of power in the last 10 years away from the Democrats was race-based, right? That Southern strategy was initiated in an era where only 10.5% of the country was minority, right? Today, 33% of the country is minority. We are coming out of the other end of the Southern strategy from a racial standpoint. And as I go through in my charts, and we've written about this in a Mother Jones piece that's out online right now if you all want to look at it, we make the argument that what is emerging is a 21st century electoral majority strategy that is not a Republican strategy, but a progressive strategy that is going to be the next great electoral strategy based on some of the stuff I went through today that will be built on this more multiracial, multicultural America and the rise of this millennial generation, which is the other big sort of factor that's growing in the 21st century. And the key, I just want to close by saying this, is that the idea that somebody in this day and age, given how much our population has changed, could make a reference to welfare reform, it shows how out of touch with how America is evolving some of the analysts on our side of this party are right now.
Okay, with that, we'll close it off because I know some of the journalists need cutaways and individuals. Thank you very much. Thank the panelists, Frank, Sherry, and Janet Murguia.